You won't believe what happened the night I let one of my students stay after class to finish his project. What began as a routine favor turned into a conversation I never expected, and one that changed the way I saw myself and others forever. But before I dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city and the comments. I'd love to know how far this story is traveling. Now, let me take you back to that Thursday evening. The school halls were quiet, humming with the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and the muffled squeaks of a janitor's mop somewhere in the distance. I'd stayed late plenty of times before, the perks of being a senior art teacher who practically lived in her classroom. But that evening felt different. Maybe it was the soft rain tapping against the windows, or the wave air smelled faintly of turpentine and pencil shavings. Or maybe it was just that Larry was still there. Larry wasn't the kind of student who begged for extensions or skipped deadlines. He was focused, respectful, and a bit older than most 22. I think he had returned to community college after working odd jobs for a few years, trying to piece his life back together after his father passed away. There was something steady about him, the kind of off-quiet that draws people in without adventuring. He had asked earlier that day if I could stay after class to finish his final painting. It's almost there, Miss Carter. I just need a couple more hours. I don't want to turn in something half-baked, he said, brushing a streak of charcoal off his cheek with the back of his hand. Call me Brenda when we're not in class, I said with a smile. And sure, I'll be here until 6 anyway. He nodded, grateful. I watched him settle into the back corner of the studio, the one with the best light. Hallways chose that spot. Something about the light hit the canvas made his colors warmer, richer. He worked with this intensity that reminded me of someone older than his years, the way his brow furrowed when he mixed paint, the careful way he traced out a figure before filling it in. For a while, I stayed at my desk, grading sketches, sipping lukewarm coffee, occasionally going up to watch him work. It was comforting in a way I hadn't expected, the quiet companionship of two people sharing space without pressure. But time passed. The sky outside turned a deeper shade of blue, and the classroom lights began to feel a little too bright. You've got a good eye, I said finally, standing and walking over to where he worked. He looked up startled, then relaxed into a smile. Thanks. You really think so? I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it, I replied, arms crossed slightly. I tilted my head to get a better view of his canvas. A woman stood in the center, her expression soft and melancholy, her hair swept back by wind. You could almost feel there was vulnerability in her stance, something raw and tender. Who is she? I asked. He hesitated, then said, I'm not sure. I guess she's kind of a mix of people I've known, women who've been through things but still hold themselves with dignity. That answer struck me more deeply than I expected. I studied the painting a moment longer, then looked at him. You paint emotion better than most people I've met. He looked down, his hand tightening around his brush. I think that's because I feel more than I show. There was a silence then, not awkward, just still. I felt something shift, not between us necessarily, but in Sadim. It had been years since anyone had looked at me, really looked, and seen beyond my title, my age. My worn wedding band I hadn't yet taken off, even after the divorce was final. You know, he said after a beat, most people just assume I'm quiet because I didn't have anything to say. But I do. I just never know when it's okay to say it. You can say anything you want here, I said gently. He looked at me again, and this time his eyes didn't dart away. They held steady. Searching. I think I admire you more than I'm supposed to, he said. His voice wasn't nervous, just honest. It caught me off guard. My heart fitted, but I kept my face neutral. What do you mean? I mean, you're someone who notices things, who gives people space. You didn't have to let me stay late. You didn't have to check in. You didn't talk to most students like this, and I noticed that. I notice you. I leaned back, slightly trying to read his expression. He wasn't being flirtatious. There was no edge to it. Just truth. I've spent a long time trying not to be honest, I said quietly. Why? I shrugged. I don't know. Life has a way of shrinking you down if you're not careful, especially when you're a woman past a certain age. You stop being seen, or worse, people see right through you. He looked at me then with something that felt heavier than sympathy, understanding, maybe a knowing that didn't come from pity, but from lived experience. I don't see through you, Brenda, he said softly. I see you. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I wasn't expecting this, not from him, not tonight. But at WSN, single quotes, to you and comfortable, that was oddly grounding. We sat in silence for a while. Just him painting, me watching. The sound of the brush across canvas like a soft heartbeat between us. When the clock hit 7, I finally broke the silence. You should probably head out. It's getting late. He nodded, began cleaning up. But as he packed away his brushes, he looked over and said, Thanks for letting me stay and for listening. Anytime, Larry. As he left, the door clicked softly behind him. I sat there for a moment, the quiet settling around me again. But something inside had shifted. A door cracked open, letting in a breeze I didn't know I'd missed. And it knew that conversation, that unexpected honesty, would stay with me long after. Paints had dried. The next day, I found myself distracted during class. I tried to stay focused, correcting brush strokes, adjusting the easel angles for students, offering the usual light critics, but my mind kept drifting back to the previous evening. To Larry's words, to that quiet intensity in his voice when he said, he saw me, not through me, but me. I'd had many students over the years. Some were wildly talented, others barely made it through with a passing grade, but Larry was different. There was something thoughtful in the way he moved, how he observed the world around him. He didn't speak to impress, didn't try to charm, and yet his presence lingered like Vesmol of linseed oil after a long day, subtle but hard to forget. When the final bell rang, most of the students rushed out, eager to leave for the weekend. I began wiping down pallets and rearranging supplies when I heard a quiet knock on the open door. I didn't need to look up. I knew it was him. Hey, he said, his tone gentle. Are yourself back already? I smiled, though I kept my hands busy organizing. A drawer of worn-down pastels. I left something in the supply cabinet yesterday. Thought I'd grab it before I forged a tag in. He replied. Then after a pause, you about a second. I glanced over, saw him standing there, a little hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. He wore the same denim jacket, sleeves pushed to his elbows. His dark hair was slightly messy, like he'd run his. Fingers through it a few times on the walk-in. I nodded and motioned it toward the workable. Sure, sit. He walked over, but didn't sit immediately. Instead, he stood behind the chair, one hand resting on its back. I was thinking about last night, about what I said. I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable. I looked at him, then down at my hands. You didn't. He let out a breath, quiet relief. Good, because I meant it. I wasn't trying to cross a line or anything. It just felt right to say it. You're Simeon I respect. That's kind of rare these days, I said, voice low. Sincerity, especially from someone your age. Heavily sat, his fingers fidgeting with the zipper on his jacket. I wasn't always like this. After my dad passed, I couldn't have disappeared from people. From myself, I didn't want anyone getting close. Butart brought something back. Or maybe it reminded me that feeling things doesn't have to be a weakness. I nodded slowly, understanding more than I care to admit. Grief has a way of reshaping us. Quietly, sometimes without permission. He looked at me then, really looked. What reshaped you? It was such a direct question, not invasive, just curious. I thought for a moment before answering. Time, I said finally. And disappointment, and yes, grief too. Not just from loss, but from letting go of versions of myself I thought I'd be by now. He nodded like that, made perfect sense. There was a long pause before he said, "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something, but you don't know what all the time?" I answered, almost lying. "You think at my age you've been only waiting, but life keeps surprising." He smiled then. "You've surprised me." It was a small comment, said without weight, but it hung in the air between us anyway. A sudden, loud laugh echoed down the hallway. Probably a group of students lingering near the vending machines, and the moment shifted. I stood, needing to move, to do something with my hands again. I have a bunch of leftover canvases in supply. "Room," I said over Miss Holder. "If you're serious about cutting this series of yours, you shall take a few." He followed me without question, and we stepped into the cramped supply closet. The air was thick with a sense of dust and wood, and the lone light bulb overhead buzzed faintly. I reached for a stack off canvases, and as I handed them over, our hands brushed. A small thing, but an auto sent a flicker of something I didn't want to name through my chest. "Thanks," he said, his voice quiet now. I nodded. "Just promise me you'll actually paint on them." "I will," but he hesitated. "Would you look at them when I'm done? Give me honest feedback, of course. Always." He didn't move to leave. Neither did I. The silence was charged, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where nothing needed to be said, but everything was understood. Finally, he stepped back. "All right, it should go." As he turned, I felt a strange pull in my chest, a tangle of something unspoken. I walked him to the door, and before he left, he turned back and said, "Brenda, I don't know what this is, but I'm glad it's happening." I didn't reply right away. I watched him disappear down the hallway, his footsteps soft against the lit NOL I am. And when he was gone, I stood there for a long time, heart beating faster than it should have, wondering what it was I had just stepped into and why I wasn't pulling back. The weekend came and went, but Larry's words stayed with me like a whisper I couldn't shake. I kept thinking about that look in his eyes. Not wide-eyed admiration, not a mature infatuation. It was quieter, steadier, a kind of gaze that seeks understanding instead of approval. At 57, I'd grown used to being overlooked, or worse, treated like I had passed ascertained expiration date for being noticed, truly seen. But Larry didn't look at me that way. He didn't look at me with pity or amusement. He looked at me like I mattered. By Monday, I had convinced myself that the weekend would have cooled whatever strange current had begun flowing between us, that things would go back to normal, that the classroom would return to being just a classroom. But at DID and single quotes T, when Larry walked in that morning, he greeted me with a warm, quiet smile, not hesitant, not overeager, just familiar, like we shared a secret that neither of us was rushing to speak aloud through the class. He barely looked at me, but when the students packed up and left, how injured. Of course he did. I didn't ask why. I just waited. He approached at the front of the room slowly, a folder tucked under his arm. I brought something. He said, "Paintings I worked on over the weekend for feedback." I took the folder and sat down at my desk, motioning for him to sit beside me. The scent of oils and linseed drifted from the canvas boards inside. When I opened the folder, I paused. The first image was of a woman sitting alone on a bench, back straight, eyes distant. There was a quiet sadness in her posture, a restraint. She looked strong but tired. The background was vague, just swirls of shadow and fading light. The detail was stunning, but it wasn't the technique that got me. It was the expression, the recognition. It was me, not literally, but emotionally. It was the version of myself I tried to keep hidden behind polite smiles and lecture notes. I flipped to the second painting, this time a hand resting on eatable beside a steaming mug. Just a hand, older, graceful, worn with age, but still beautiful in its own way. And somehow it too felt like me. A part off him I hadn't thought anyone noticed. When I looked up at him, he was watching carefully. Too much, he asked softly. No, I said. It's honest. He nodded. That's what I wanted. You said I paint emotion well. I thought, maybe it's because I paint what I don't say. I felt my breath catch for a moment. Then I asked, what aren't you saying? He looks down, hands clasped in front of him. That I look forward to class more often I should. That talking to you feels more grounding than anything else in my life right now. That when I paint, I think of you. There was a lump in my throat I didn't know how to swallow. Larry, this is complicated. I know, he said quickly. I'm not trying to pressure anything. I just wanted you to know I'm not confused about what this is. I'm just being honest that I studied him. There was no trace of manipulation in his face. No calculated lenses, just raw openness. It terrified me and moved me at the same time. You're still a student, I said gently. I'll graduate in a few weeks, and I'm still your teacher for now. We sat in silence again. The kind of silence that sits heavy between two people who know something unspoken is growing louder. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. Brenda, I don't want anything from you. I just don't want to lie to myself or to you. I wanted to respond, but my mouth wouldn't move. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because everything I was feeling felt too big to fit into words. So instead, I reached for Thellis' painting in the folder dot. It was unfinished. A soft sketch, outlines only. A woman standing by a window, her profile lit by the suggestion of sunlight. Her hand was on the glass, and her reflection was faint, but you could tell she wasn't looking out. She was looking in. I traced the edge of the canvas with my fingers. This one, I said quietly, might be your best. He smiled. It's you. I looked at him. Is it? He nodded. It's the moment you see yourself. How I see you, not how the world does, not how time does. Just you. There was a warmth in my eyes then, the kind that warns off tears, not from pain, but from release. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. It just closed. The folder slowly stood and said, let's walk. He followed without question. We left the classroom behind. The echo of our footsteps trailing behind us assuaded down the quiet corridor. Today's last light slipping in through Thedel windows. I didn't know where we're walking to, but I knew I needed air, space. Clarity dot, we ended up at the small garden behind the school, a patch of green moss students ignored. I stood by the bench and finally said, you make me feel like I'm still capable of being seen. Hadn't responded with words. He just stood beside me, quietly present. I looked at him. But I need to know this isn't some illusion, that it's not just about admiration or the moment. He turned to face me, his voice steady dot, it's not. I don't want a moment. I want truth. And if that means just being someone who sees you when others don't, I'll take height. I stared at him, searching for anything that would tell me he didn't mean it. But all I saw was the same calm certainty that had unnerved me since that first late afternoon in the classroom dot, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe he meant it. The days that followed passed like a gentle current, steady, quiet, but always pulling me a little further from the shore. I thought I'd be anchored to forever. I didn't rush to define what was happening between Larry and me. Wouldn't speak about it directly again, at least not in words. But our silence began to say more than any conversation cowled. The way he lingered at the end of class, waiting until everyone had gone before approaching me with anatherkamas or a soft. Question: the way he listened when I spoke, really listened, as if the spaces between my words mattered just as much as the words themselves. I felt the shift in myself slowly at first. A little more warmth in my cheeks when he walked into the room. A little more attention to how I wore my hair or what earrings I picked out in the morning. Not out of vanity, but out of awareness. He made me feel present again in my own skin. Alive in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing. On a Thursday after his final criticism, Larry stood by the classroom door. Hesitating, I was erasing the whiteboard, pretending that. To notice the way he lingered like a question waiting to be asked. "You free tonight?" he finally said. I looked over my shoulder, trying not to osmole. "Depends who's asking." He smiled back. "Someone who'd like to buy you a coffee?" It wasn't a line. It wasn't a date. It was a soft invitation, a continuation of whatever we had been building. "I'd like that," I said. He met me later that evening at a small cafe near the edge of town, the kind with low lighting and too many second-hand books stacked against walls. The rain had returned, soft and steady, and the windows fobbed around the edges, casting everything in a soft glow. He held the door open for me, and I felt oddly nervous as I stepped inside. But once we sat down, once the coffee arrived and the music faded into the background, the tension eased. We didn't talk about school. We didn't talk about rules. We talked about books and regrets and the strange weight of growing older. He spoke about his father, how his passing left a silence in his life no one else seemed to hear. I spoke about mid-divorce, the years of fading connection, the quiet ache of rebuilding. "You ever feel like you just disappeared?" I asked at one point. "All the time," He said, "until now." That made me look at him, really look. And I saw it again, that honest softness in his expression, that sense of calm that came not from age, but from death, from loss, from rolling like me. He reached across the table, then, not boldly, just an auto, let his fingers brush mine. I didn't pull away. "You don't have to say anything," he said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that I see this, whatever it is, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't happening." I turned my hand over, let his fingers rest there for a moment. It was the gentlest thing I'd felt in years. "I didn't know what this is either," I admitted, "but I'm not afraid of it." We sat like that for a long while, fingers burrily touching, coffee growing cold between us. When we finally left, the rain had lightened to a mist. He walked me to my car, hands in his pockets, every step and hurried. "Will I see you tomorrow?" he asked and nodded. "You always do." But before I opened my car door, he stopped me. "Brenda," he said, voice low, "you've given me more than feedback or encouragement. You've given me a reason to believe I can still matter, that I can still love." The words settled between us like something sacred. I felt my chest tighten, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of being seen so fully. I stepped closer, not impulsively, not dramatically, just close enough that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the rain collecting at the corner of his lashes. "You matter," I whispered. "You always did," and I kissed him. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was gentle, warm, and full of everything we hadn't said. A quiet recognition of something that had grown, not in the shadows, but in the soft spaces between us. When we parted, I saw a smile in his eyes before it reached at his lips. "I've been waiting for that," he said. We didn't make promises that night. We didn't pretend to know where this road would lead, but we acknowledged it. We chose it. And as it drove home through the rain, the city lights glowing in the puddles, I realized something I hadn't in years. Sometimes the most unexpected connection is the one that brings you back to yourself. And sometimes the student isn't just learn, he teaches you how to feel.